When someone finds out that I am an economist, I am often asked if I have any investment tips or perhaps a sense of whether the economy is heading in the right direction. These are important questions, but economics as a field of study addresses a much broader set of issues. What binds all of economics is the focus on how society allocates its scarce resources. Its physical capital, technology, knowledge, labor, land, and natural resources to achieve its needs and wants. Perhaps the central concept of economics is opportunity cost, which is to say that we can't have and do everything. As a result, we must make difficult decisions where we forego certain opportunities so that we can take advantage of others. For example, at NC State, you are investing in yourself and your future career by pursuing a college degree. In the process, you are foregoing wages that you could earn right now if you had a full-time wage-paying job. This reality implies an opportunity cost or trade-off. On the one hand, investing in your future career by going to college versus, on the other, working and earning income today. At its core, these are the types of decisions that economists study. In the United States and most of the world, economic activities are organized around free and competitive markets. What this means is that buyers and sellers are free to exchange goods and services at prices that reflect their relative scarcity and what people are willing to pay for them. If there are lots of buyers and sellers and everyone has good information about the characteristics of goods being traded, economists generally agree that markets are an appealing mechanism for organizing economic activity. They encourage inputs like labor and capital to produce the goods in highest demand by society, and they allocate goods to those who value them the most. But having said this, markets are not perfect. For example, many people might have concerns about how market economies distribute goods and services across the population, with perhaps some groups receiving too few resources and others receiving too many. This is, of course, a value judgment and depends fundamentally on one's sense of justice. Another concern which I want to focus on here is that markets may not be complete. What I mean by this is that firms who produce goods and services may not bear the full costs of production, and consumers who buy goods and services may not capture the full benefits of consuming those goods and services. For example, steel mills might emit pollution that negatively affects local residents. Our farmers might apply fertilizer on their lands that, when it rains, runs off into neighboring streams and generates negative impacts for downstream communities. On the consumer side of the economy, secondhand smoke from cigarettes can generate negative consequences for those in a confined space. And more positively, your getting a vaccine not only protects yourself from getting sick, but it also reduces the chance that everyone around you gets sick too. In all of these cases, what you see happening is that economic agents, whether firms or consumers, are not bearing the full costs or capturing the full benefits of their actions. In this way, there are unintended third-party effects, or what economists refer to as externalities, at play that undermine the effectiveness of markets to allocate goods and services in a desirable way. You can see this in places like Ohio, where I grew up. The Cuyahoga River in Cleveland was so polluted from industrial waste in the late 1960s that it literally caught on fire, and the Maumee River near Toledo is so polluted from agricultural runoff today that it often reeks from algal blooms. Perhaps the most significant externality society currently faces is climate change. When I turn on the air conditioner in my house or drive my car to work, I use fossil fuels like coal and oil that, when combusted, release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. In a small way, these emissions contribute to climate change, which has negative consequences for the natural environment and the economy. If I am honest, I must concede that I do not fully account for these impacts because they are often experienced by others. In this way, my actions are generating third-party effects, and because I don't fully account for these effects, when going about my daily life, I end up using my air conditioner and car too intensively. This is a textbook case of a negative externality, and the overuse of goods and services that generate carbon emissions is exactly what economists would predict. Two factors make the climate problem especially daunting. First, the effects of greenhouse gas emissions are truly global in scale. The climate does not care whether greenhouse gas emissions come from North Carolina or China or Africa. They all mix uniformly in the atmosphere and generate consequences for the entire planet. Second, greenhouse gas emissions can endure in the atmosphere for over a century, implying that the emissions we release today have impacts for generations to come. For these reasons, climate change has been referred to as the mother of all environmental problems, and tackling it will require a global and long-term response. So what do economists recommend we do in response to the climate challenge? One of the key insights from economics is that firms and households need to bear the full costs of their actions for markets to generate desirable, or in economics jargon, efficient outcomes. A tax on carbon emissions would, in principle, accomplish this. By taxing the goods and services that generate greenhouse gas emissions based on their emissions intensity, a carbon tax would send a market signal to firms and households that incentivize them to reduce their use of goods and services that damage the global climate. In the process, carbon emissions would decline, and the third-party and environmental impacts of those emissions would also decline. Other interventions designed to reduce carbon emissions include regulations that force firms to adopt one-size-fits-all practices regardless of cost or the firm's unique circumstances. Economists have shown that the total cost to society in terms of lost economic output and household welfare are less with a carbon tax. Having said this, it's worth pointing out that with any proposed tax, there are thorny issues. What is the appropriate tax rate? What do we do with the tax revenue? What if the tax results in businesses shutting down? Will a tax on U.S. firms put them at a disadvantage relative to their foreign competitors? And what about the distributional impacts of taxes, especially on low-income people? These are all important questions that academic economists like myself address through our research and outreach, and without going into details, let me say that several clever answers to these difficult questions have been put forward. And finally, let me be clear that we should not think of a carbon tax as the only policy solution to climate change. Another aspect of the climate challenge involves developing game-changing technologies that radically reduce the cost of energy production and the carbon intensity of transport, agriculture, and other economic sectors. Because these breakthroughs often benefit not just the individual firms who invest in them, but society at large as the technologies diffuse throughout the economy. There is a tendency for firms to underinvest because they don't directly profit from the spillover benefits that other firms capture. In this way, we have a positive externality, or third-party benefits, that investing firms don't take into account. This is where institutions like NC State can play an important role. By now, I trust you have heard that NC State is a place where we, both faculty and students, think and do. In practice, that means developing new technologies that are less energy intensive and more resilient to climate change. That means transforming our largely fossil fuel-based energy sector into one that is more reliant on renewable technologies like wind and solar. That means developing new agricultural practices that have a smaller carbon footprint but continue to feed a growing population. To achieve these breakthroughs, sustained public investments will be required, and this is where the government revenue from a carbon tax might come in handy. Is that something you would support? A carbon tax that finances game-changing technologies, even if it means you pay more to cool your home, charge your phone, fill up your car, and buy groceries? That is something you and the rest of society will have to decide.